Okay, so we have our environment set up to run AngularJS, even though we're not actually affecting any of the page output. Currently, we can see that we have the Angular object available in our JavaScript console. So this is proof that Angular is indeed active in this page. So let's start affecting the actual page. Let's start making some code. So in our module, I'm going to create a controller, and I can chain these methods because the module method of Angular returns a module, which in turn has a controller method. So you will often see this chaining. Usually it's like this in a new line to have some indentation and just be more legible. So we're going to call this controller home controller, and the second parameter is the function of that controller. So I can make a variable here called user, just to hold the user's information, but we want to be able to communicate with this view and update this user object from the view. So I'm going to give this directive. This div, all it does is encapsulate all of our page. So I'm going to use the directive ng controller, give the name of home controller, and this basically wires up this whole thing that is called the view with our controller. So in order to actually communicate and pass variables back and forth, we're going to need something called scope. Scope is a shared bit of memory, a place where you can put, it's an object and all of its properties are visible in the view and in the controller. It's actually the same object that you're modifying from both ends. So this scope we put into this function because it is something called a service. It is an object provided by a piece of code within the Angular structure, within the module in fact. You can define your own services, you can define your own object that is included within your module and that you can call from your controllers to use within a controller. The reason for these things is that the code within a controller is only exists within that controller. That is its only scope. So something like this, where we need an object that it lives outside of the controller as well, for example, or sometimes you need a service that will provide you with some data or something, you need to call it, and these the parameter names that you put as the function parameters are read by Angular, and a corresponding service of that name will be provided to your controller. So Angular already has a predefined service called scope that provides the functionality I just described, which is it is shared with the view, and that is being passed to this controller by us specifying that we need the scope for this controller. So the way we use this is say scope dot user, and that scope is an object, and saying dot user just adds a property to that object, and user is going to be an object in turn, and it's going to have a name and an age. So this object, this scope object, is visible in the view. Therefore I can go somewhere in this view. I'm right above the panel heading right now, and I can output the value of this object. I'm going to say user.name. This is how you output variable values. You can also output other things like expression results and so forth. So if I refresh now, you can see the tags disappeared. It doesn't show our curly braces user.name. That's because Angular saw that as a command and interpreted it. Although we have no output, and that's simply because our name is no, so it is being outputted correctly. It's just nothing in there. But if we put a name in here, and now that's what we get. And the interesting thing about this, sorry, let me move this up so it doesn't look so bad. being OCD. The interesting thing about this output is that this is directly linked with the actual object, so that if the object were to change, this would change as well. There's no delay. You don't have to refresh anything to have this name show the actual data of that object, and that is because this is actually reading straight from the exact same object that our controller is looking at, because they're sharing scope. So I'm going to use another directive that is going to add another level to this. It's called ngModel, and what this basically does is wire up this input with that model as well. So I'm going to say user.name, and this is going to put the contents of that object into this input box, so you can see. But moreover, it'll also link the object with the input the other way around. So if I were to change this, it'll change the actual object. So as you can see here, it changed as well, and in the actual object in our controller, it is also changed. So I'm going to do the same for age. I'm going to say user.age. So now we have our view wired with our controller as well as our model. This is called the model. This is our data structure, right? This is called a model. So I want to add another function to this model. Well, we don't have any functions yet, actually, so I'm going to add a function as one of the properties. Right now it's just been data properties, but I'm going to add a function called age error, and this is going to be a validator function. So, and I'm putting this in the model rather than the controller, because following good guidelines for MVC, a model should take care of its own data. So function of this model will be age error. It's not going to take in any parameters, and it's basically going to say if this dot age, and this is referring to this object, of course, is smaller than 12, return you are too young. Okay, else, or we don't really need else, to be honest, return false. So age error is going to contain either this string or false. So if we want to know if there's an error with the age, we just call age error, and if it's false, then there's no error. Okay, screen. Underneath user age, which is where we want to show our validation message, I'm going to say span class text danger. So a span is just regular formatting for text. Class text danger has nothing to do with Angular. This is Bootstrap, and this basically colors it red. That's all it does. It's a CSS class, and in here we're going to output user.age error. Two brackets because this is a function rather than a data field like this. As you can see, these curly braces can call functions and use their return values as their output. So it says false because I forgot to mention, while the recording was off, I did add this clause that I thought was missing before. If we omit this clause and go back to what we had a second ago, it will show the message even before you've typed anything in, which is probably not what we want. We want the message to show only if we've actually typed in an age. So I could say this dot age, for example. This is actually probably a better way than what I just previously had. So I'm going to say if this dot age and this dot age is smaller than 12. So this dot age will compute to false if age is null, because null and false are equivalent. So now it only says false. That means it's valid. It's not this if statement is not carrying through. However, we don't want this false to show ever, right? We only want the message to show, if any. So we're going to use another AngularJS directive for how to achieve this. So in this span, we're going to say ng-show, and in here goes some expression that if true, then this thing will show. So if user.age error, then show, which basically means if this computes as false, then don't show it, and if it computes as true or anything that can be interpreted as true, like a string, then show it, which in practical terms means don't show if it says false. So now if we type 2, it'll show us the message immediately. You don't have to wait for anything, and you don't have to code any jQuery or JavaScript or get any sort of document dot, get an element by ID, anything like that. And if you input a valid age, then it'll go away. So I'm going to remove that this example output from the top now, just so it doesn't bother us. Don't worry about this other window, it's nothing to do with this. So yeah, I'm going to take this out, and we have a validated form. Now all we need is a button to take us to the next thing, to submit the form. So I'm going to copy paste that from here. Okay. So I'm going to copy paste this link. So it has an href of nothing, which means if I remove this this click from here, it'll be more simple. So if I refresh this page, we have a green button. Well, it's not a button, it's an anchor tag, but the coloring and the formatting again is all done by Bootstrap. I'm going to stop talking about Bootstrap really soon, so now from now on just assume that all of the looks are taken over, see, by these Bootstrap classes like text success, which colors it green, and that little arrow is taken care of by this glyphicon span. So I'm going to re-add that thing I just took out, which is ng-click, and that is basically an on-click that Angular is programmed to handle. So we're going to say submit user. So this is basically being linked to a controller or scope function called submit user. So this is not part of our user model. This is the user has nothing to do with the submitting of a form. So we're going to make so submit user. Sorry, yeah, no brackets, yeah, name. So here we're going to check that the user passes validation. So here we're not going to say this because we're not within the actual object, but scope.user. And we're just going to make an alert for now. So now this link will only work if the form passes validation, because as you can see, this the onClick calls this function, which only performs the alert if it's getting false from age error. So if I put in a valid age, then we get the alert. So to actually make this button work and do something useful, like take us to the quiz section of this application, we're actually going to first of all have to build that page.